Hello everyone. It's 10 o'clock Wednesday morning and we are ready on this 22nd day of April to get into our discussion of Luke, the book of Luke. All right, so last time we were looking at some of the historical markers and talking about the Herods, the family of the Herods that were set as governors over the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, put in that place there by the Romans. And so we're looking at, we're getting into the timing of the birth of Christ. And as to the book of Luke, as we begin, we first have to get Jesus' cousin John born. And so then we deal with how that birth was announced to John's father, the priest Zacharias, and then we get into the actual birth of Christ and so forth. So what we're doing here now, though, is we're kind of on a sidebar. Good morning, Vic. Kind of on a sidebar here, looking at the birth of Christ. We'll say more about the birth of Christ as we get into the book of Luke. But just now, this morning, I'm actually going to start in Matthew. And so in Matthew chapter 2, I would like to read. I'll give you a moment to turn there. Matthew chapter 2. I'm going to read the whole chapter, and then we'll make some comments about that chapter as they pertain to our study here this morning. All right, so Matthew chapter 2 is where I will begin today. Matthew chapter 2, starting at verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And this is the prophet Micah. You find this in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will be shepherd of my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly, and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, and said, Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, Out of Egypt I have called my son. And that's a prophecy out of the book of Hosea. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that had been ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. And that prophecy in Jeremiah we recently read in our daily readings. Verse 19 of Matthew 2. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. And he rose and took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in the city of Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. So several references to prophecies being fulfilled there about Christ, to reconnect and then move forward from where we were last time and looking at this passage here. We know that there were different sons of Herod that were set over different parts of the kingdom after the death of Herod. Archelaus was just mentioned in the end of this reading. After the death of his father, Herod the Great, the kingdom was divided between the three sons. Archelaus ruled over Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. So he would have been over that region at the time of the return from Egypt of Joseph and Mary and Jesus. Then we have Herod Philip II. He ruled over the regions north of Galilee. There's a reference in our book of Luke to this in Luke chapter 3, verse 1. Also in chapter 3, verse 1 is Antipas who is mentioned. Now, regarding Archelaus, Herod, his father, Herod the Great, was a very bad man. But history records that Archelaus was even more so, perhaps. In fact, he was so brutal, he was so ineffective, that he was deposed and replaced by a governor that was appointed by Rome in his stead, and enter then Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was the 5th governor of Judea. So Archelaus was so horrible, even the Romans booted him out and put Pilate there in his place. Then Antipas is the Herod actually that we hear about the most in terms of the New Testament and pertaining to the life of Christ. Antipas is the one who puts John the Immerser to death, as we read in Matthew 14. Hello, Tom Sizemore. Matthew 14, 1 through 12 records the death of John the Immerser. This would have been at the hands of Herod Antipas. Also, Antipas is the one who examined Christ on the eve of his crucifixion. All right, but now, having just looked at Matthew chapter 2, we're tying this in with our Luke study here today. And I just read chapter 2. So let's look at what we have in there. I was pausing because I'm hearing raindrops falling. I knew it was coming. All right. So we have mention of wise men from the east. All right, let's talk about the wise men from the east. Everybody knows about them, right? Or do they? Okay. Is the number given? How many wise men were there? First question of the day in this study. I'll give you a moment. Anybody want to answer? How many wise men were there? Kudos to Sue Reddy. No number is given. Correcto. No number is given in the text. Now, the misconception that there were 3 stems from the gifts that are mentioned, But if we look at that carefully, there's not an idea here that here was a little gift of gold, here was a little gift of frankincense, here was a little gift of myrrh. These gifts were quite substantial, I'm sure. This was probably a caravan of wise men, and there were categories of gifts that are mentioned, 3 categories of gifts. But that's where the misconception has been drawn from, that there were 3 wise men, and some history has even given names to them. Gaspar, Melchior, and I can't remember the names at the moment. Hello, Nancy Groves. But that's strictly made up. That's just fictional. We can call it historical fiction. Yeah, we can be gracious, but the whole concept comes from the 3 categories of gifts and the fact that, you have 3 things mentioned: gold, frankincense, myrrh. And so then you get these depictions of the 3 wise men, Melchior, Gaspar, and Balthazar, as their traditionally given names. Hello, Ava Anderson. Well, there's a number of things wrong with this. I mean, first of all, the text doesn't give us how many. And we notice something else. Do you notice something else in verse 10? Now think, as I ask this question, think of the traditional nativity scene, the depiction of the nativity. And do you notice any problem as you look at verse 10 of Matthew 2, as we read? Hello, Rael. Look at Matthew chapter 2, verse 10. Think in your mind of all of the nativity scenes that you see in December. We won't talk about the problem with December right now, but look at that verse 10, and do you notice anything? Is that the one I want? Matthew 10? Let's see. It's verse 11. My apology. I was wanting verse 11. Look at verse 11 and see what you see there. Yeah, no stable. They weren't in a stable. Thank you again, Sue. They were in a house. They were in a house. Joseph and Mary were staying in a house by this time. And it's 2 years since the birth of Jesus. So obviously, they did not stay the entirety of this time in a stable. Hello, Oscar. They did not stay in the stable. They were in a house. Joseph was a carpenter. He probably contracted work during this time. He was keeping his family in this place. At this time, it was difficult to travel with a baby the distance that they had come from, to come to Bethlehem to register for the taxation, the census for the taxation. And so they are here still 2 years later, but in a house. And you'll notice that it always shows the 3 wise men at the manger. Well, they weren't at the manger. They were at the house. They came to the house. Now, another misconception that is a problem with these wise men, the way it traditionally gets presented to us. These men were not kings. What are they called? What are they really? There's another term that gets used for them, but usually not as often. We say, the song gets sung, "We 3 kings." Well, kings, no, but magi, yes. Magi. Now, this is where, yes, we get the word magician. But to be precise, these men were astrologers. Very likely Zoroastrians. And that would mean they were wise men from Persia whose knowledge of the Hebrew Scriptures dates back to the time and influence of Daniel being in that land. And you can cross-reference Daniel chapter 5, verse 11. So this was the nature of these men, this caravan. And I'm sure that the things that were obtained from these men were substantial and would be able to carry the family for a long time to come, maybe even into the adult life of Jesus that we read. This is pure speculation, but it is reasonable. We don't have any reference to Joseph after Jesus is about 12 years old. We just don't have any more reference to Joseph. And it's very possible, because of the ways of the culture at that time, that Joseph was substantially older than Mary. And men did not live much past 50 years of age anyway at that time in that culture. So he's out of the picture very soon. And the travel that they had to do back and forth and everything that is going on with this picture, the treasures that were provided by these wise men probably carried the family for some time, perhaps the duration, all the New Testament period of the life of Christ, very likely, very possibly. Maybe, we have some hints that things were thin again, and John is told by Jesus to take care of his mother upon his death, maybe by that time. But anyway, there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye, and certainly there's a lot to contrast with the traditional picture that has been presented about these wise men. All right, let's go back now to the text in Luke. And so we're going to go back to Luke chapter 1. I'm turning there, so I'll give you a moment to turn there. Luke chapter 1, and we're going to pick it up now. We've looked at the preamble already, the first 4 verses. And so now we're going to start there at verse 5 and read about the announcement to Zacharias about the birth of John. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, so there's our tie-in as we just read in Matthew, there was a priest named Zachariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth, and they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and both were advanced in years. Now while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of the people were praying outside at the hour of incense. And there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. And you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great before the Lord, and he must not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. And he will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared." And Zechariah said to the angel, "How shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years." And the angel answered him, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time." And the people were waiting for Zechariah, and they were wondering at his delay in the temple. And when he came out, he was unable to speak to them, and they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple, and he kept making signs to them and remained mute. And when his time of service was ended, he went to his home. After these days his wife Elizabeth conceived, and for 5 months she kept herself hidden, saying, "Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me to take away my reproach among the people." All right. So here it is. Whoops, I hit my light. Let me get it to where we want it here. Sorry. It's very sensitive to touch. Hello, Jerry Collins. All right, so the text we have just read is Luke chapter 1, verses 5 through 25. And so we start with the priest Zacharias, or Zacharias in Hebrew. His name means Yehovah has remembered. Yehovah or Jehovah has remembered. Now, if you go to 1 Chronicles chapter 24 and read verses 4 through 19. Hello, Teresa. I'll just give this out as some homework. I won't read this just now, but if you want to go and look there, I'll give the reference again. This pertains to Zacharias, his division in the priesthood. Go to 1 Chronicles 24, 4 through 19. We'll talk some more about this, but the temple priesthood was divided into 24 divisions, with each division serving twice a year for 1 week. Twice a year for 1 week, the 24 divisions. Now that's important to this story, and we'll say some more about this. And again, the cross-reference there is 1 Chronicles 24, 4 through 19. All right, now his wife was Elizabeth, and it says that she was of the daughters of Aaron, and so that means that both Zacharias and Elizabeth were from the priestly tribe. And it says that they were both righteous before God. Now remember, as we've talked about with Luke, and how he gathered information, how he checked all of this information, because he was motivated by divine, direct inspiration of God. So every item would be checked and approved by God. So in effect, what we have here in the text is God's statement, God's estimation of these two people. And that's very important to notice. We don't often get such strong statements like this about individuals in the Scripture. This is the inspired assessment that is stated in the text about both of these people. They were believers. They conducted their lives in a righteous manner. Their lives were justified in the eyes of God. They were people who were justified in the eyes of God. This is God's statement about them. And then right after it makes that statement in verse 7, talks about Elizabeth being barren, well advanced in years. Now, we'll say more about this, and this gets to the statement that Elizabeth makes in the end of our text that we read, verse 25, in the times that they lived in. Now, mind, not that this was the correct assessment, for we have just noted how God assessed them, that they were both righteous before God. There's no problem here about the conduct, the lives of these people. But in the eyes of the culture, the fact that Elizabeth was barren would have been seen as a sign of disfavor. And again, that's why Elizabeth says that. Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me to take away my reproach among the people. She doesn't say my reproach in your eyes. She says my reproach among the people. So this is a cultural mindset. It's not something that God has instructed them on. It's not something that is true. Because the true thing is that Elizabeth is righteous. She's a righteous woman. But just as we read, the rain falls on the just and the unjust, and things, time and chance, happen to all men. We know that this is what's happening here. This is not a mark of any bad thing on the character of this woman. It's just that the culture would have thought that, very much so at the time. Any thoughts? All right. Verse 8, it says that Zacharias was doing his service in the order of the division. And again, his division would have been on duty. Zacharias' division would have been on duty for one of their biannual stints. So then it also says, his lot fell to burn incense. All right, now, put this all together. Each division was on duty twice a year for this service, and then they would cast lots to see who would get to actually do the service. And this was a very high honor. Now, again, I won't go and look at these passages, but if you want to jot them down, take note of Exodus chapter 30, verses 7 and 8. Exodus 30, verses 7 and 8. And with that also 2 Chronicles 29:11. Exodus 30, 7 and 8, and 2 Chronicles 29:11. So, because there was such a large number of priests, most would never see their names selected for such a duty as what we see Zacharias being called to do here. And if you had, if your name came up and you did that service, and then next time, your division came up and your name came up again, you would have to decline in order to give someone else an opportunity, because this was a once in a lifetime, if ever, honor that would be performed. This is a high thing, and I believe that the Lord chose this time because it was this time in the life of Zacharias. No doubt Zacharias was mindful of this supreme moment of his lifetime of priestly service, and no doubt God was too, and selected this grand moment on purpose. So what he was to do, he was to go in and make sure that the incense was burning. The incense was kept in the temple burning perpetually, and it's just in front of the veil. The table of incense is just in front of the veil that separated the most holy place from the holy place. And if you look at designs of the tabernacle or the temple, this is what we're talking about. So this is significant also. That's where the angel was standing, right there at the entrance. I think that's highly significant right there. Now, verse 10, it says that, Zacharias was in there a while, and the people were concerned about him, and they're all standing outside. Well, why are they so concerned about him, and why are they standing outside? Well, we've talked about how important this service was. We talked about how rare it was for a man to even have the opportunity to serve in this capacity. And because it was such a big deal, well, it was very anxiety-laden. I mean, the man that was performing this was very much under pressure. He was, to do everything right. Hello, Logan. Hello, Merwin. To do everything right, not make any errors, etc., etc. Just the whole thing, the intensity of this moment was such that men were known to faint away, pass out, while they're in the holy place performing this duty. For this reason, they would oftentimes attach a rope around the ankle of the man. This was also the reason why they had bells around the hem of their garment, because as long as the man is moving, you can hear the bells. If the bells stop tinkling, then something may have happened. You give the rope a tug. If the rope gets tugged back, then you know the guy's still up and he's still moving. It was maybe standing still or something. But otherwise, then you can pull the rope and pull the man's body. I mean, and I say body because sometimes men even died. They were so overwhelmed with this thing. Pardon about my computer making noises there. Somebody's putting messages in my Dropbox. So sometimes they would also have hooks to pull the man out and all that kind of thing. So then we have verse 11. We have the angel appearing, standing on the right-hand side of the altar of incense. Now, I can send you copies of my notes, and in that you'll have a diagram of the interior arrangement of the temple at Jerusalem, and you can get an idea of what we're talking about here. But I will forego that just now because we don't have that in front of us. If I were more tech savvy, I could be doing a slideshow, but I'm not. All right, so let's look at verse 12 of the text. Luke chapter 1, verse 12. It says, "And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him," that is the angel, "when he saw him, and fear fell upon him." Fear fell upon him. This is a perfectly normal and appropriate response. A perfectly normal and appropriate response. Let's go over to Luke chapter 12 for a moment. Luke chapter 12 and verse 5. Luke 12 and 5. Let's read 4 and 5. "I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he has killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him." So who does Jesus say, "I'll tell you the one you should be afraid of"? Who is that? Anyone? In Luke chapter 12, as I just read there, verses 4 and 5, who should we fear? Should we fear other men? Even if those other men have the authority and the desire to end our life? Vic and Sue say we should fear God. Amen. We should fear God and not men, no matter what they do to us. I mean, what can they do to us? If they do take our life, that's where their power ends. They can stop our hearts from beating. They can dismember our head from our bodies. They can kill our bodies. They can't kill our spirit. And in effect, they just send us home earlier, if that's the case. I mean, that's all they can do. So fear God. So this is a perfectly normal response that Zacharias has. You can look also, I won't take the time, I need to be wrapping this up, but Matthew 16, verse 12, and Mark 8, verse 15 talks about the leaven of the Pharisees. Fear the leaven of the Pharisees, the influence of the Pharisees, symbolizing in those passages the evil influence of sin. The leaven of the Pharisees included their false teaching, Matthew 16 and 12, their hypocritical behavior, Luke 12 and 1. Jesus also speaks of the leaven of Herod, and Herod Antipas was immoral, corrupt in his conduct like all the Herods, Mark 6, 17 through 29. And we read from Mark 3 and 6 that the Pharisees and the Herodians were pals, they were buddies over being against Christ together. So we need to wrap this up for today, but here's the lesson for us as we conclude. The lesson is, don't take men too seriously. Hi, Rick Greenwood. It's not that we should not be respectful of men, for Jesus taught us that we should do, and his apostles taught us that as well. Matthew 23, 1 through 12 is a good reference to look at. Matthew 23, 1 through 12. But we should not be afraid to examine the teachings of men in light of the Word of God, to see whether we should follow them or not. Remember that the Bereans were called by Paul, they were more noble. Why were they more noble? They were more noble because they did not take the Apostle Paul at his word. What? An apostle? One who has direct divine influence from God, inspiration from God? They didn't just take his word at his word. No, they checked against the scriptures to see if what Paul was saying was true. That's what we always must do. We should know that no man can make the determination as to whether we are bound for heaven or for hell. All right, so we'll get back to Zacharias' response the next time. And thank you, and I wish you a good day. Plan to see you again here for the reading at 2 p.m. Yes, they studied the scriptures. We also should study the scriptures. Anyone have a final thought before I close today for this part? Okay, I'll give you one more minute here, and I'm going to make a note to myself where to pick up next time on this outline. Okay, well, I don't see any more comments. If you want to go ahead and comment on anything, or if you have any questions, if you do want these notes, let me know. I'll try to answer anything in the comments that I have missed. And I wish you well. Love you. Much love, much respect. Bye for now.